Hi friends. The last video I made was part 1 of my April wrap-up, so this is going to be part 2. I have three books that I didn't talk about in my last video that I want to talk about here. 2 were classics, but we're going to start with the Anomaly, which was a YA book, which I don't read that often, but I really liked this one. So yeah, let's talk about that one first. So I read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is a story about April, who is, she's an artist. She lives in New York City. I think she's about 20. One day coming home from work, she comes up from the subway and comes across a very stylized and abstracted metallic robot. She kind of art installation, a statue, and she calls her friend who makes videos. They make a YouTube video about it. They're just goofing around, they upload it and wake up to realize that this is not exactly an art installation, that there are actually 30, 40 similar structures that have just appeared at exactly the same time in cities all around the world, and video footage has glitched out. No one knows who put these up. They seem to possibly not be made of man-made material or obeying natural laws, and what was a fun YouTube video begins to suddenly possibly be a record of April being the first human to make contact with foreign intelligence. Yeah, so the premise for this novel instantly intrigued me. Just that was enough. But this book is written by Hank Green, like I mentioned. If you don't know who Hank Green is, he is a YouTuber. He and his brother, John Green, who is also a very well-known YA author, have been making videos for I think 12 years, at least 10 years here on YouTube. And so having this sort of premise for a novel come from someone who actually has a lot of experience with YouTube was very interesting. A lot of the ideas in, to some extent, explored in this book are very, very contemporary, about technology, about internet fame, and the way it sort of messes with your own emotional state, psychology, views on the world, this idea of becoming instantly famous for something you really don't have credentials for. There's really, April in this circumstance, there's no reason that she should be a spokesperson for or about, foreign intelligence making contact with Earth, but except for that she happened to be at the right place at the right time. There's, she has no qualifications for this sort of idea, and yet she finds herself being very famous and on having interviews and that kind of thing. And it's very interesting, very interesting idea coming from someone who actually has some experience with YouTube and internet fame in that way. I think what I loved most about this book was Hank Green's voice. I love his voice as an author. I really liked all of the characters. I really enjoyed the main character. There were a lot of moments that I just laughed out loud. There were a lot of very interesting ideas that I thought were expressed really intelligently, very eloquently. The premise for the book was very interesting. The voice was entertaining. The plot had some weak points. If I'm fair, it definitely felt underbaked in a few places, but I use that word specifically, underbaked, because I was a little bit disappointed. I felt like it didn't have to be weak. I feel like it just wasn't quite fleshed out in a few points, and maybe that was because things were being simplified down to kind of fit narratively into a YA novel, and I was approaching it with sort of a more logical mind, thinking that I don't think political processes would have gone that way. That seems a little bit too convenient to be believable by the adults in the stories. So maybe I'm kind of ruining it with that approach, but there were a few weak points. However, this is a first in a series. I don't know how many books there'll be, but I know there's a sequel, and I'm definitely going to be picking that up. I think I'll pick up anything that Hank Green writes. Just his voice in this book was really enjoyable. Another book that I read in April was Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. This is, I think, one of his more popular works, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about the plot, but I was unfamiliar, so if you are unfamiliar, the plot is about Tess, who comes from a very poor family. Her last name is Derber Field, and her father, aspiring to more wealth, realizes that they are related to the D'Urbervilles, who are a wealthy family, and there is a wealthy D'Urbervilles that live nearby. So Tess, young and attractive, is sent off to make acquaintance with these kin, this extended family, to see if she can lift her family up in status and wealth. The rest of the plot, I'll remain vague, but she comes across two different characters who are romantically interested in her, and these two men are very different from each other in their character development, they take different character arcs. Tess remains a central character that is really a victim of a lot of circumstances. Her being a woman and being from a low status kind of leave her with not some undesirable circumstances, I guess, and where she's really acted upon by these other characters. And I think that that's probably one of the things I did really like about this book, is that I felt like Thomas Hardy was really being progressive with these ideas of showing the double standards of morality for men and women, and the disadvantages that sort of the structure of society put on Tess, and sort of calling social attention to that. I felt like he was doing that. I'm not familiar enough with Victorian literature to really know if that's an extremely progressive idea to find in Victorian literature. I felt like it was, and I think that's probably what I appreciate most about this book. Something that I didn't like a whole lot, and which maybe surprised me a little bit, but that by the end of the story, I actually felt like Tess didn't have... She was really a bland character that didn't have a whole lot about her other than her virtue. By the end, she just kind of felt like a little bit of this virtuous character that was maybe saintly, just a victim in a lot of ways. And I think that I feel like I got where that was coming from, but that it sort of went so far that it was just so bland, like there was nothing else about her except for her virtue. I also found that throughout the book there were a lot of points where I felt very emotionally invested in the characters, that I really cared about the dynamic between them and the character arcs, and then at other points I felt very exacerbated by these characters and I didn't care what happened to them. So my interest and enjoyment of reading this book really fluctuated from point to point. It didn't carry me the whole way through. Also, I don't know if you'll get what I mean, but I feel like there are some books that are actually more enjoyable when you know how they end, and you can go back and see how things evolve. You can appreciate their evolution, rather than them being the kind of plot that you need to experience once. It actually has more meaning as you experience it repetitively. I feel like this book might be kind of like that. Maybe knowing how things end and where characters end up will help me enjoy them more from the beginning. Maybe I'll read it over again and maybe I'll enjoy it more then. I don't know. The last book that I haven't talked about yet is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is a fun book. I'm not even gonna everyone knows what it's about. Alice goes down the rabbit hole and finds herself in a bizarre world with a nonsensical series of events, and she has adventures there. There were definitely moments where I thought, is this just like utter nonsense that is ridiculous gibberish, or is this pure genius so masked in nonsensical child level language that it's easily dismissed but actually brilliant? I don't know. And by the end I think it's this one. I think I just wasn't even sure exactly how to approach it. I've done no sort of analysis of Alice in Wonderland. I'm not familiar with it, but it felt like there were sort of a lot of political ideas underlying that it would be really interesting to sort of read an analytical work on. Alice in Wonderland and then revisit it. But that being said, when I read it this time, I was purely interested in the entertainment value and familiarizing myself with this work as a classic work of children's literature, and it was very enjoyable. I found the humor just to be great, and it just sneaks up on you. You're just not expecting it, and all of a sudden I would just burst out laughing, just like out loud laughing all the time. There were a lot of moments that just felt like great lines, so witty. It was really enjoyable. If you haven't read this children's classic, it's quite short and it's really worth it. I really enjoyed it. So I think that that's all. Yeah, I think that's all. So there's the last of my April wrap-up at the end of May. Yeah. Thank you for watching, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye.